Last night we had a very, very special event here in Ohr Somayach. 5 different yeshivas gathered together to learn together and sing together and daven together. And there was a lot of talk about achdus, unity, what unity is, and a lot of talk about Arvus, responsibility for one another, for one another's mitzvahs, for one another's failures. And certain Gemaras were brought, and it's a very deep and widely ranging subject. I first was acquainted with some of the sources by Rabbi Moshe Meiselman, who was a teacher of mine many years ago. And I would like to share a couple of ideas about some of the sources and some of the general ideas. One Gemara that they talked about is the Gemara Rosh Hashanah. This is on Daf Kaf Tes Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, Kol habrachos kulam afal pi sheyotza motzi. Let's take, for example, Kiddush Friday night. The Gemara says, even though you have already made Kiddush, if someone comes to you and asks you to make Kiddush for him, you can do that. In other words, let's take the scenario. It's Friday night, and you come home from shul, and let's say you're the head of the household. You make Kiddush, and you wash, make a motzi, you have the soup, and after the soup is a knock on the door. You open the door, and there's a stranger standing there, and he said, listen, I haven't done the mitzvah of Kiddush yet this Friday night. Would you, he says to the balabas, would you please make Kiddush for me? Now, the unspoken natural response here is to say, I love you, and I would love to help you, but I've already performed the mitzvah. Making Kiddush for you means you're going to listen to what I say, and you'll have satisfied your obligation to make Kiddush. Well, how does that work? It works like this. I make Kiddush, and you listen to me, and then you get the credit for the Kiddush that I made. But that's only if I'm making Kiddush. Suppose I'm practicing my Hebrew pronunciation. Yom ha-shishi. Did it right, okay? Vayachulu hashem. No. If I'm just pronouncing the words, it doesn't help him. I have to be doing the mitzvah. Then by listening to me, he also gets credit for my mitzvah. Not am I saying the words and making the sounds. So if I'm the balabas, I say to him, I'd love to help you, but I made Kiddush 2 hours ago. And it's a once-a-week mitzvah. Next time I'll have the mitzvah of Kiddush is 7 days from now. I can't do it again. That's the background to the question. But the Gemara says, even though I made Kiddush 2 hours ago, I can make Kiddush again, and in that way, he satisfies his obligation by listening to me make Kiddush again. Well, how does that work? So Rashi says a few words. Even though he's done it before, he can do it for somebody else. Sheharei kol Yisrael arevim zeh bezeh lemitzvos. All Jews are responsible for one another for mitzvos. So I have to be aware that if you need to do a mitzvah, I have a responsibility for you to do that mitzvah. Now, it is not obvious how Rashi's words answer the question. The question wasn't, I have no time, I'm busy, I'm reading the newspaper, I can't do it for you. No, you have a responsibility for other people. You can't just slough off other people. That wasn't the question. The question was a legal question. I made Kiddush 2 hours ago. I don't have a mitzvah of making Kiddush now. So if I don't have a mitzvah of making Kiddush now, I can't do what he needs. Saying the words won't do it. Making the sounds won't do it. It's got to be doing the mitzvah. And then he gets credit for my doing the mitzvah. So how do Rashi's words explain what the Gemara is telling me that I can't do it? So that's a Ran. The Ran says, when that Jew walks in the door, the Jew who hasn't made Kiddush, my mitzvah of Kiddush is mitchadesh. It comes into existence again. And when he needs me to make Kiddush, I have a mitzvah of Kiddush. And I'm doing my mitzvah of Kiddush. His need triggers my mitzvah. And then, since I'm doing my mitzvah, so that being the case, he can listen to me and satisfy his obligation also. Now, I think we have to understand the Ran as explaining Rashi, not as doing something different from Rashi. In what kind of a responsibility for his mitzvah do I have? What kind of obligation do I have for his mitzvah? Rabbi Kalinsky spoke about this last night. He hinted at it. If you say that I can't ignore him, I have to extend myself for him, I have to take care of him, I'll give him his own cup of wine. I'll give him a siddur that he can read the words from. He doesn't know how to read the words, I'll say the words, and he can say the words after me. I'm not ignoring him. I'm taking responsibility for him. I'm doing for him everything I can so that he can fulfill his obligation of making Kiddush. Who says that I can make Kiddush again? How do we get to that? So Rashi's words that say that we have a responsibility for one another's mitzvahs can't mean simply that I have to put myself out to help him satisfy his mitzvah. It has to mean that because he's obligated, I'm also obligated. That's what the Ran is saying. And the Ritva takes a step further and he says, from here you see that the whole of the Jewish people is one composite corporate entity. We are all limbs on a single composite entity. It isn't as if it's you, and me, and he, and she, and them. It's like the responsibility of my right hand for my left hand. If I have an infection in my left hand, my right hand can say, well, that's the left hand, but I'm the right hand, what do I care? We're all joined by one bloodstream. If there's an infection in the left hand, the right hand is in danger. It's all one entity, one thing. So if he hasn't made Kiddush, the one Yisrael corporation that we're all parts of is missing something. We're all impoverished. We're all in danger. So when I make Kiddush for him, because he hasn't made Kiddush, I'm making my Kiddush for him. This is a very strong indication that it's not that I have an external general responsibility for his mitzvos. That wouldn't justify my making Kiddush again. It has to be that his need for Kiddush is my mitzvah of Kiddush. A way to look at this is that the mitzvos are inherently social. What did the Kadosh Baruch Hu say to me about Kiddush? Here's what he said. The Jewish people need to make Kiddush. Do it. The command to me is that the Jewish people should make Kiddush. The command to me isn't, you make Kiddush, and then if somebody hasn't made, I look up in the book. You make Kiddush on page 6, and on page 132, it says, by the way, you should help other people do mitzvahs. Oh, okay, I'll give you a cup of wine. I'll give you a siddur with a transliteration. I'll say the words for you, and you can repeat them after me. No. His mitzvah of Kiddush is my mitzvah of Kiddush. From the Rishonim here in Rosh Hashanah, that's inescapable. That's inescapable. I think you have another example of this idea, which was not mentioned last night. It wasn't in the sources last night. At the Rambam, in Hilchos Talmud Torah, the laws of Torah study, I think, at the beginning, says a very similar set of ideas. Let me read to you what the Rambam says. I'll translate it for you, and you'll see at least how I look at it. So the Rambam starts off like this. Women and slaves are not obligated in Talmud Torah. I'm not going to translate Talmud Torah because part of my understanding requires us to translate it in a very special way. But a minor, a katan, aviv chayav lalamdo Torah. His father is obligated to teach him Torah. And he quotes a verse. Then he says, just as a person is obligated to teach his son Torah, so he is obligated to teach his grandson. And he quotes another verse. And not only his son and his grandson, but there's a mitzvah on every learned person of the Jewish people to teach all students, even though they're not his children or offspring. And he quotes another verse. It says, V'shinanta l'vnecha, the verse we have in Kriya Shema, which means something like inculcate or train your banim in the Torah. And from the oral tradition, we learned that we're here when it says banecha, it doesn't mean your biological offspring. It means tamidecha, your students. Because in general, your students are called banim. If so, why do if it's a general mitzvah to teach all those who want to learn, why then would the Torah mention your son and your grandson explicitly? Let's just include them in all the ones who want to learn. And the answer is precedence. Your first responsibility is to your son, your second responsibility is for your grandson, and a third level of responsibility is for all students who want to learn. And he's obligated to hire a teacher for his child, but he doesn't have to spend money on other people's education. And now it says, Mi shelo limdo aviv, someone whose father didn't teach him. Now, if you're going to complete the sentence, what would you say? Well, someone whose father didn't teach him should learn on his own. That's the right idea, but that's not what it says. Mi shelo limdo aviv, chayiv lilameid es atzmo. He's obligated to teach himself. And the Rambam didn't invent this vocabulary. He's quoting Chazal. That's what Chazal say. He's obligated to teach himself. And here you think, why is the Rambam saying teach himself? First of all, it's not exactly clear what that means, teach yourself. And second of all, since it's going to functionally work out that he's going to pick up the book and learn, why not just say he's obligated to learn? And even more than that, because the verse that the Rambam quotes to prove that someone whose father didn't teach him has to teach himself, ulamadatem osam ushmatem la'asosam, uses the form of the verb to learn and not to teach. For those who know Hebrew grammar, it's the kal, ulamadatem osam. So the verb has changed its meaning into learn, and the Rambam, Chazal, paraphrase it in terms of to teach himself. Why did they do that? Now let me try a little piece of grammar on you. Talmud Torah. What does Talmud mean? So in context, you think, well, it's the laws of learning Torah, so Talmud must be learning. Well, let's try a little parallel grammar. You have Tanchum Avelim, comforting those who are mourners. Tanchum comes from linachem, the PL form. You have tashlum schar, paying someone's wages. That comes from the verb l'shalem. If tanchum comes from linachem and tashlum comes from l'shalem, then Talmud comes from lilamed. That verb comes from the PL form. And the PL form means to teach. So the correct translation of Talmud Torah is the laws of teaching Torah. Not learning Torah, teaching Torah. And since it's the laws of teaching Torah, when it comes to the extreme case of a child whose father didn't teach him, for him to fulfill the mitzvah is for him to teach himself Torah, because the mitzvah is teaching Torah. Yes, teaching yourself means colloquially the same as learning. That's quite right. But to say it with precision, you say, Chayav l'lamed es atzmo. He's obligated to teach himself. Even though in the pasuk it's the kal, but that's the meaning of the mitzvah. So that being the case, let's just register. The nature of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is inherently social. It's inherently collective. It's inherently societal. It's a mitzvah to teach Torah. That's why the Rambam starts. You have to teach your son, and you have to teach your grandson, and you have to teach all the students who want to learn, and this one first, and second, and third. And then, if someone wasn't taught by his father, what does he have to do? Well, he has to teach also. The mitzvah is teaching. In this case, he has to teach himself, because he won't be able to learn and teach others unless he gets the information himself. He teaches himself. So here is a template, I think, for mitzvahs in general. The mitzvah is inherently a social mitzvah. It's not an individual mitzvah. So you don't have two branches. My mitzvah for myself, and then what I would do to help other people do their mitzvahs would be an entirely separate command, responsibility. And that's why you don't have a separate verse for being responsible for somebody else's mitzvahs. Rashi writes Arvus. Arvus really, in the Gemara, is, of course, in terms of monetary law, it's being a guarantor on a loan, which has absolutely nothing to do with this, except philosophically. And the verse for which Arvus is learned is the Karshlu Ish Ba'achiv in the curses in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28. One of the things it says there, that you'll be running away from your enemies, and the person will trip over his brother. Now, if you imagine a crowd running, if A trips over B, B's already on the ground. How did he get to the ground? He didn't trip over A. Can everybody be tripping over his brother? And yet it's taken as a general statement, because Leish Ba'achiv. So the Gemara dashes that to mean that when another Jew could do a transgression and you could stop him, even though, as was mentioned last night, it says if you could protest to him, but I understand that it's not just protest, you could stop him some other way. You say, well, I can't protest, so I'm free of responsibility. No. You know where his gun is. He wants to kill so-and-so. He needs his gun. You know where it is. Take the gun. Don't say, I can't protest, so I'll let him shoot him. If you can stop the transgression, you should stop it. So here, it means you trip over him when he's going to do a transgression, and you could stop it somehow, and you don't, so you also will be held responsible for his transgression. That's being tripped up by him. But that's where responsibility is stated and has a source and a verse. Here, Rashi uses the word of Arvus, but it's not clear what it means and how it works. The Ran and the Ritva are explaining how it means and what it works. It means that the mitzvahs are inherently social in the way in which this mitzvah of Talmud Torah is inherently social. The mitzvah inherently is to teach others, not just to learn and become well informed. And even if you have mitzvahs which, in some sense, can be individual, they have social dimensions built in. Prayer. So, there's a mitzvah to daven 3 times a day. And by the way, strictly speaking for women, there's a mitzvah to daven twice a day. And many pious women daven 3 times a day. It's a very good idea. Now that's the mitzvah to you to daven. But then there's the idea of a minyan. It's much better to daven together with a minyan than to daven individually. Why is that? Where's the idea of minyan learned from? Well, minyan is something, minyan meaning 10 adult Jewish males, a minyan is something which has many consequences, one of which is there are certain types of prayers which can only be said in the presence of a minyan, like Kaddish and Baruch Hu and Kedusha. But it's much more than that. What I'll tell you now, I heard from Yeshivat Ohr Somayach, one of the Bracha, many, many years ago. The Gemara learns minyan from the spies that went up to the land of Israel to bring back a report. There were 12 spies. 10 came back with a terrible report which dispirited the Jewish people, and they turned their backs on the conquest of the land of Israel, and they spent 40 more years in the desert. And 2, Yeshua and Gottleib, were faithful to the mission. And in the incident, the 10 were killed. They were executed by God. And they're called an Ada. And there's a double Gzera Shava. 2, that's 10. That's what we have 10. The double Gzera Shava to a verse that describes sanctifying God's name. So the Gemara derives from this, sanctifying God's name requires a minyan, and one of the expressions of that is prayer. So Soloveitchik said, what does this double Gzera Shava teach us? Why would the 10 spies be the source for 10 pronouncements of sanctification and the idea of a minyan for prayer? What's the intellectual connection between them? And he said, a spy is not just someone who violates no trespassing laws of the government of the other country. A spy is performing an action on behalf of another government. He's there to gather information and report it to the government of another country. He's performing a national action, not a private action. If spies are caught taking pictures of a military installation, we don't put them in jail. The country that they're spying against could cut diplomatic relations with the country they're from. They're not just on their own taking interesting pictures for their album. They're spying. It's a national action. So Rabbi Soloveitchik said, what is the idea of a minyan? A minyan of that's standing together in prayer. We know that when you pray, you stand, so to speak, in the throne room with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, sitting on the throne, Kiviyachol, and you're speaking directly to the Creator of the universe. When you approach the throne room and you knock on the door, and the ministering angel says, "Who are you?" and you say, "I'm Reuven Schwartz." The answer may very well be, "You're Reuven Schwartz, come back next week. We haven't got time for you. We're not interested in hearing from you. We'll record it and the king will look at it at his leisure." You come with 10 people? The ministering angel says, "Who are you?" Say, "We are the ambassadors of the Jewish people." The door opens automatically. He can't say no. Because Baruch Hu has a commitment to the Jewish people that he doesn't have to each and every individual Jew. Now the 10 of the minyan function as an ambassadorial representation of the Jewish people. They carry the national identity. That's why they get an immediate hearing. That's why what they say is taken much more seriously. So, you're standing there in shul with 9 other people, getting ready to daven. The 10th one walks in, the whole world is turned upside down. You're now ambassadors of the Jewish nation instead of just Reuven Schwartz. That's because prayer has in it an essentially social dimension. It's meant to be a national performance. If, for whatever reason, you can't be part of the national performance, you're not just discarded. You can do it the other way, but the social dimension is there and it creates a new reality of what prayer is. Many mitzvahs have this structure. One of the general rules that was discussed last night, and I had some discussion with some of the other people there, I'll tell you the way I understand it. I learned this from Rabbi Meiselman. You should sin in order that your friend, your fellow Jew, should have a merit. Now, in several contexts in the Gemara, it's put as a negative interrogative. Do we say that you should sin in order to benefit some other Jew? As if to say, the answer is clearly not. But the truth is that the answer is clearly yes. We do say it. There are exceptions. We don't always say it. But Taisus in several places, in Shabbos and in Sanhedrin and Gittin, catalogs the cases where we do say it. And for the cases where we don't say it, there's always some extenuating circumstance which makes it different from the general rule, which makes it different from the norm. Here are 2 examples of where it is said, which fit the rule. The most impressive one, and the one that he leans most on, is the Gemara in the 6th chapter of Psachim. And here's the scenario. It's Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach, there's a mitzvah to offer the Paschal sacrifice. That mitzvah is very important. It's one of 2 mitzvahs which, if you fail to perform it, you're liable to the penalty of koretz, which is a very serious penalty. And by the way, just so you understand it carefully, the mitzvah that carries that weight is offering the sacrifice, not eating the seder. It's not eating at night, not eating matzah, not eating the meat from the korban. It's offering the korban, offering the sacrifice. Now here's the problem. The various sacrifices of the day before Pesach have been offered, including the afternoon daily offering. There's a rule that all of the normal range of sacrifices must be offered before the afternoon daily offering. They have to be finished before the afternoon daily offering. It's a positive mitzvah to finish them all before the afternoon daily offering. And here comes Reuven Schwartz again into the temple after the afternoon daily sacrifice, and he says to the Kohen, I have a problem. I need to offer a sacrifice to finish my period of rehabilitation from something that required a sacrifice, and what's called a Mechus Kippurim. And if I don't offer this sacrifice, I can't participate in the Paschal sacrifice. And the Kohen says, if you had only come 15 minutes earlier, then I'd have been happy to do it. But the afternoon sacrifice has been offered, and the rule is that they all have to be finished before the afternoon sacrifice. So I can't do it. I'm awfully sorry. And Reuven Schwartz says, but then I'm not going to be able to offer the Paschal sacrifice. And the Kohen says, I'm so sorry. My rules prevent me from doing that. So the Gemara says, what should the Kohen do? And it says the Kohen should offer Reuven Schwartz a sacrifice and break his rule so that Reuven Schwartz can participate in the Paschal sacrifice. Why should he do that? Because Reuven Schwartz's mitzvah is an objectively stronger mitzvah. Reuven Schwartz's mitzvah is a mitzvah which, if it's deliberately omitted, carries kores. And the Kohen's mitzvah is a mitzvah which doesn't carry kores. So Reuven Schwartz's mitzvah is more important. It's inherently more important than the Kohen's mitzvah. And therefore the Kohen has to sacrifice his mitzvah. Just as if the Kohen himself with the Mishul Kippurim. He had to bring the act of sacrifice for himself so that he could do it. And now he says, I have two positive commandments applying to me. One is finish everything before the afternoon sacrifice. The other is do the Paschal sacrifice, and I can't do both. If it was for himself, what would he do? He would say, which one is the stronger mitzvah? And we're being told to do exactly the same thing for somebody else. That's one example. The other example is this. It's a positive mitzvah not to free non-Jewish slaves. To hold on to you are able to do it, but you're not supposed to do it. You're supposed to keep them as slaves. Maintain them as slaves. There's a certain situation in which, if it's a female slave, she's going to be in a situation where she can't get married. A male slave, where he can't get married. So the Gemara says, but then he has a mitzvah of procreation, which is Lashevish Yasarav Sovra Pasuk and Dach, which makes it a bigger, according to some Rishonim, makes it a bigger mitzvah. He has a mitzvah as long as you hold him as a slave. Hold this condition, he can't do that mitzvah. So it's one mitzvah against another. Your mitzvah of continuing to keep him as a slave versus his mitzvah of having children. The Gemara says his mitzvah of having children takes precedence. So you have to violate your mitzvah of keeping him as a slave in order that he should fulfill his greater mitzvah of having children. So do we say you should commit a crime in order that the other person should get married? Absolutely, we say that. Absolutely. When the only competition is between your mitzvah and his mitzvah is greater than yours, we say that you should violate yours in order that he can fulfill his. I'm putting in now, just as if you had both mitzvahs for yourself and you had to decide which one to do, of course you would do the bigger one and violate the smaller one. Same thing is true here. So that's the general rule. The general rule is when all that's at stake is your mitzvah versus his mitzvah, and your mitzvah is inferior to his mitzvah, you violate yours and enable him to do his. There are exceptions. If he's in trouble with respect to his mitzvah because he's guilty of deliberate wrongdoing, then he may sacrifice a claim on your violating yours to help him. That's another matter. He's not an innocent victim of circumstance. He himself brought himself to that situation. In that case, we wouldn't use the general rule of violating your mitzvah in order to save him. But the general rule is to violate your mitzvah in order to save him. There's no question about that. Another example, someone who has taken a public commitment to be very careful about certain types of mitzvahs, in particular, in this case, agricultural mitzvahs. And he has food, and we have a rule that if a chaver has food, he immediately takes the tithes, the trumas and maasros and everything from it, so it's edible. But someone got to his food beforehand and thought it was fixed and took the food and left. And there's no way to catch him. Now, there's a mitzvah, when you take trumas and maasros from a certain amount of food, it should be adjacent to one another. All the food should be in one place. But you can take it long distance. It's just not the best way to do it. And we say that the chaver has to take trumas and maasros for that food also, protect him from eating food which has not been tithed and which is a very big transgression. So he's taking trumas and maasros not in the best possible way, which is a violation of the best possible way, to save the other fellow from a much bigger transgression, because there may be no fault on the part of the chaver. It could happen when he wasn't looking, or when it wasn't he waits away, and the person took on credit, whatever it is. The point is that he violates his mitzvah in order to be able to save the other person from violating his mitzvah. So that is a general rule, and the general picture is that because his responsibilities are my responsibilities. It's not that, as we said before, it's sort of like the government has required Ruvain to dig a ditch in front of his house. Well, Ruvain's under a lot of pressure, and he's got limited resources. I'm his friend, and I have responsibility to care for him. So maybe I should lend him some money to do it, or maybe help him do it. That's because I care for Ruvain, and I have obligations of friendship and general obligations of charity. I don't have any obligation for his ditch. It's not as if it's on me to dig ditches. It's on me to care for him and care about him. That's the external view that each person has his own list of responsibilities. And then in addition to all of those, we also have to care for one another. Here it's that his ditch digging is my ditch digging. Because he needs to dig it, it's my ditch digging also. That's the way it comes out. So this is a symbol of how the mitzvos are inherently social. And that means that Jew has to think of himself as part of a larger social entity, a larger social group, and understand that that's the way the Torah wants it to function. However, that's not all there is to the story, because there are cases where the emphasis is on the individual independent of the group. I'm going to mention two of them, and I'll only leave you with the observation that since there are indications on both sides, there's a question of balance, a question of priorities, which will vary from person to person, and case to case, and time to time. So the situation is complex, not simplistic. It's not one-dimensional. The Mishnah Sanhedrin says, if there's a capital case going on and there are witnesses who say they saw the criminal perform the crime, and on the basis of their testimony, the court is going to decide whether he should be sentenced to death or not. Before they give the testimony, we warn them, listen, what you're about to do is very consequential. Because of your words, maybe a Jew will die. You should know that Baruch Hu created man singular, so that you should know that the single human being is the same as the whole world. He created man singular so that each person should say to himself, God created the world for my sake, you should lead it for Allah. This is what you are about to do. Your testimony so that a man will die. Be very careful and take it very seriously. That's what the Mishnah says. Well, it's obvious to anyone who reads the Mishnah that there's a problem. That's why man was created singular? Sure. At first, Adam was the only person in the world. So he was the whole world because he was the only one. If he were to die, then there'd be nobody left. Adam could say the world was created for my sake because there was nobody else there. But when there are a million people there, or a billion people there, how can each one of them say the world was created for my sake? What about all the other people? That's an obvious problem, right? Well, the Maharal raises that problem. And the Maharal has a very deep idea. He says, consider, now, not everybody with certain secular prejudices will appreciate what I'm going to say now, to which I say, then study harder. Consider the world before Adam was created. The world with everything in it, but no people. What is it worth? From our point of view, it's worth nothing. If it ceases to exist, nothing lost. No one found their value in sequoia trees, or orangutans, or butterflies, or anything else. The only thing that has intrinsic value, other than, of course, the creator of the universe, is human beings, for whose sake the whole of the rest of the universe was created. The human, spiritual, moral drama is the purpose of the whole world. So, when you go from a humanless world to a world with one human in it, you go from zero value and significance to unlimited value and significance. One human being makes the difference between zero and unlimited value. The Mishnah is telling the witnesses, that's what you are putting in danger. The kind of creature who could justify a whole creation. Yes, all the other people in the world have that same distinguishing feature. Each one of them also could take a humanless and therefore valueless world and turn it into a valuable world. And that's what you're giving testimony against. This meditation obviously says that you have significance independently of everybody else. In total isolation, you have significance. So you're not only a limb on the general body of the Jewish people, you are that, but you're also something which has its own individual significance. That's one example. And the other example is this. I mean, there are more, but the one I'm going to keep tonight. Imagine, the Gemara, the Mishnah, Shumas talks about this. Imagine a group of Jews, and a group of Goyim surround them, and they say, we want to kill one of you, and if we don't have the opportunity to kill one of you, we'll kill all of you. What should you do? And now, there are two cases. First of all, they just say that. Give us one of you, or we'll kill all of you. The halacha is, you all have to die. The reason? Because there's no way to choose who should be given. Who could say my blood is redder than his blood? There's no principled way in which you can choose, and therefore you're not allowed to hand anybody over. But what if it isn't that way? Second case, where they tell you who they want. Give us Reuven Schwartz. If you give us Reuven Schwartz, you'll all go free. We'll kill him. If you don't give us Reuven Schwartz, we'll kill all of you, including Reuven Schwartz. He's going to die no matter what. Can you hand him over or not? This machlokes is Rabbi Reish Lakish in the Gemara, and the Rambam paskins, you can't hand him over, even if his name is given. So here is not a question of choice. They made the choice. What could possibly be the reason that you shouldn't hand him over? If you think of the group of Jews as a corporate entity, and each Jew in the group as a limb, it's like having gangrene in your leg. Either we cut off your leg or you die. Choose! Cut off my leg, thank you. I mean, I don't want to die. I don't want to die for my leg. That makes no sense. If the group of Jews could constitute a single corporate entity, each one of them is a limb, and the question of Reuven Schwartz was identified, for sure give him up so the rest can live. So the whole rest of the body can live. You can't give him up. The message is that sometimes the valued individual means the group has to die rather than participate in killing the individual. I heard from Tzvika Shalevsky, well, 40 years ago, and I found that in Rabbi Yonah afterwards. I don't remember if he told us with Rabbi Yonah. It's called Abizrayev de Ritzicha. The three things for which you have to die rather than transgress have certain formal definition, and then there's extensions. And one of the things that you have to die for rather than transgress is murder. You can't murder somebody else to save your life. But then it's not just pulling the trigger. It's even just handing him over to the guy we're going to kill him. That also is something which you cannot do, even at the cost of your own life. That's the legal background. But what's the gedunk? What's the meaning of it? The meaning of it is, Reuven Schwartz is not being treated just as the limb of a composite organism. He's being treated as something of intrinsic value of his own, which prohibits handing him over. Even if everybody has to die, including him. You can't hand him over. So the truth is that the Torah's message for us is there is a social concept of Judaism. Mitzvahs are inherently social. And when there's a conflict, you treat the other person's mitzvahs just like your own mitzvah. But also, there are sources that indicate the individual Jew carries his own significance. If you want an analogy for biology, I would say it's like the cell in the body. Cells come in dozens of different types, different structures, different sizes, different shapes, and different functions, very different functions. From a hair cell, which grows hair, to a neuron, which transmits electrical impulses, to a muscle cell that participates in the contraction and relaxation of a muscle. They're very, very different from one another. But as, of course, you all know, they have the same DNA. And as you know, in principle, you could clone from the DNA of any cell. Which means that in addition to being a differentiated, unique feature of a composite corporate entity called the body, each also carries the template of the whole in itself. Which means it could stand for a whole independent body. And the cell is playing both roles simultaneously. I think that's something which you could take as a model for the way the Torah looks at the relationship of the individual Jew to the body complex of the Jewish people. Now this is going to create conflicts. But sometimes what you could do in terms of your own responsibilities and what you could do as a limb of the whole conflict with one another. And these are questions you should ask. Each one is different, it depends upon your life circumstances. One standard one that's been asked many times, and depending upon the circumstances, gets different answers is, let's suppose you have a person who can make a lot of money. Let's say $1,000 an hour. And with that $1,000 an hour, after taking off for his personal needs, he could support 100 people learning full time. How many hours a day should he use for his own learning and not work and not earn the $1,000 and thereby reduce the number of people whom he could support? You might have thought, $1,000 an hour. He's supporting a lot of people. If he takes off, let's say 3 hours a day to learn for himself, instead of there being 500 people, there'll be 300 people, 200 people. Is his learning worth more than 200 people's learning? Well, if you're looking at in terms of the collective entity of the whole of the Jewish people, certainly not. But he has his own responsibilities also. That's another part of his identity, another dimension of his existence. And now the two dimensions are in competition with one another. Then you have to go and ask. And this is something which happens practically to people. People who work in Kiruv. Shall I go out to a far-flung place like the 7,000 Chabad emissaries all over the world? They live in very far-out places, and their children are with them. That's a big sacrifice in many ways. On the other hand, those Jews out there will have no contact with any Jews ever. People traveling through. It's a sensitive and difficult question. You need to ask someone who's a Gottleib Torah and who's a tzaddik and who can answer it with authority. So all I gave you tonight is the background to know that there are these questions to ask.